I looked into the darkness outside the Challenger's window. Our lights barely cut through the black water. 8,000 meters underwater, the pressure out there would crush someone instantly. I squeezed the metal railing hard, my knuckles going white. "You okay there, Mitchell?" I turned to see Captain Evans standing behind me, his face lit up by the blue light from the monitors. "Yes, sir. Just taking it all in." He nodded, not entirely convinced. 3 weeks down here and you still look like you're seeing a ghost every time you look out there. I forced a smile. Just a healthy respect for the deep, Captain. Well, your healthy respect has produced some excellent samples. Dr. Phillips was just telling me about the extremophiles you collected yesterday. Thank you, sir. As Evans walked away, I turned back to the viewport. It's pretty funny. I'm a marine scientist who's scared of the deep sea. But here I was, on a research trip to the bottom of the ocean. I'd studied these depths for years from labs and research centers, but actually being here felt completely different. I checked my watch. Time to collect the next round of hydrothermal vent samples. I grabbed my equipment and headed to the collection bay. The next few hours passed quickly. I extracted minerals and biological samples from the collection units we'd placed near some active vents. Focusing on the work helped me not think about all the water surrounding our vessel. After logging the last sample, I put everything away and headed to the mess hall. The small room wasn't empty when I got there. Sarah Bennett sat at one of the tables talking with lots of hand gestures. Michael Harris sat across from her, looking down at a tablet and occasionally nodding without looking up. "Tom," Sarah waved me over. "Come look at these readings." I grabbed a cup of coffee and joined them. "What am I looking at?" "Pressure anomalies." Sarah pushed her tablet toward me. "I've been tracking them for the past week. See these fluctuations? They don't match any known tidal patterns or underwater currents." I studied the graph. "Could be equipment malfunction." "That's what I said," Michael murmured without looking up from his own data. Sarah shook her head. "I've checked the equipment 3 times. These readings are accurate." "What do you think is causing them?" I asked. "That's the exciting part. I don't know." Her hazel eyes lit up behind her rectangular glasses. "It could be a new type of deep-sea current, or maybe seismic activity we haven't detected yet." I was about to respond when the mess hall door flew open. Ryan Wilson burst in, his blonde hair disheveled and his eyes wide. "We've got a situation," he said, breathing hard. "Japanese research vessel about 20 nautical miles from here. Their submersible is trapped at the bottom of the trench." The room fell silent. "How bad?" I asked, feeling my stomach tighten. "Bad. 4 scientists on board. They're stuck in some kind of crevice and can't maneuver out." Sarah stood up. "Have they sent coordinates?" Ryan nodded. "Captain wants everyone in the command center now." We followed Ryan through the narrow corridors of the Challenger. The command center was already buzzing with activity when we arrived. Captain Evans stood at the central console, his face grim as he spoke into a communication device. "This is Captain Evans of the Challenger. We're receiving your distress call." "Over." A crackling voice responded, heavy with a Japanese accent. "This is Captain Yamamoto of the Kotoku. Thank you for responding. Our situation is critical. We understand you have a submersible trapped. Can you give us more details?" "The Koan was conducting an exploratory dive when it became wedged in a narrow crevice at approximately 10,900 meters. They have been trapped for 6 hours now. Oxygen levels are becoming critical." I felt my chest tighten when they mentioned the depth. The Challenger Deep is the deepest spot in all the Earth's oceans. Captain Evans looked around the room. "What assets do we have that can reach that depth?" Our chief engineer stepped forward. "The Shackleton can handle it. She's rated for 11,000 meters. How quickly can we deploy?" "She's ready to go. We'd need about 3 hours to prep for a rescue mission." Evans nodded. "Start preparations immediately." He turned back to the communications system. "Captain Yamamoto, we are preparing our submersible for a rescue mission. What's the estimated remaining oxygen supply for your crew?" At current consumption rates, approximately 18 hours. But if they remain calm and conserve oxygen, perhaps 24. Understood. We'll keep this channel open. Please stand by for updates. As the command center erupted into activity, I found myself backing toward the door. The thought of going to the very bottom of the trench made me break out in sweat. Evans caught my eye. "Mitchell, Bennett, Harris, stay behind. I need to speak with you." When the room had cleared except for the essential personnel, Evans addressed us. "I need 2 volunteers to pilot the Shackleton. The mission is to attach a rescue cable to the Koan and guide it out of the crevice." Sarah immediately stepped forward. "I'll go, Captain." Evans nodded. "Your experience with pressure systems will be valuable." He looked between Michael and me. "I need one more." Michael stared at his tablet. "I'm not qualified for submersible operation." All eyes turned to me. I knew I was the logical choice. I had the training and experience with the Shackleton from previous research dives, though none nearly as deep as this would be. My mouth went dry. "I'll do it." Evans studied me for a moment. "Are you sure, Mitchell? I know your history with deep water operations." "Someone has to go," I said, surprised by the steadiness in my voice. "I'm qualified, and I know the Shackleton systems better than most." "All right. You and Bennett will pilot. Harris, I want you monitoring from here. If those pressure anomalies Sarah's been tracking are real, I want to know about them before our people encounter anything unexpected." Michael nodded. "The Shackleton will be ready at 0400 hours, Evans continued. "That gives you both 6 hours to rest and prepare. This is going to be a dangerous mission, even without your personal concerns, Mitchell. I need you both at your best." "Yes, sir," Sarah and I responded in unison. As we left the command center, Sarah put her hand on my shoulder. "You didn't have to volunteer, Tom. I know how you feel about the deep." I gave her a weak smile. "Like I said, someone has to go." "Well, I'm glad it's you. There's no one else I'd rather have piloting with me." I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. As I walked back to my room to get ready, I kept thinking about the Koan stuck in the dark, with everyone on board still hoping someone would find them. I was scared, but I knew I'd made the right choice. In 6 hours, I'd be heading down to the bottom of the Mariana Trench, and whatever was waiting for me in the dark water below. I met Yuki at 0400 sharp outside the submersible bay. The Shackleton waited for us, our deep-sea sub with its tough titanium hull. 6 hours of tossing and turning had done little to calm my nerves. "First time going to full trench depth?" Yuki asked as she punched in the entry code for the bay. "That obvious, huh?" She gave me a small nod. "Your hands, they're shaking." I stuffed them into my pockets. "Just need some coffee." The preparation bay was busy even though it was early. 2 technicians ran final checks on the Shackleton's life support systems while another loaded emergency supplies into the storage compartments. Sarah was already there, talking with the chief engineer over a tablet. "Took you long enough," she said when she spotted us. "I've been reviewing the descent calculations. We need to modify our ballast ratio to account for the extreme depth." Yuki moved immediately to the external hull, running her hands along the pressure seals. I followed her lead, grateful for the distraction of routine checks. "You've been down this deep before?" I asked, testing the primary oxygen valves. "Twice." She moved methodically from one system to the next, once in the Puerto Rico Trench and once here about 15 kilometers north of where we're headed today. "And it went smoothly? Both times?" She paused, considering her answer. "The Puerto Rico dive was textbook. The Mariana dive..." Her hands continued working, checking the rescue winch mechanisms. "We lost hydraulics at about 10,000 meters. Had to surface manually." My stomach clenched. "What caused it?" "Never determined conclusively. Pressure fluctuations, maybe." She must have noticed my expression because she added, "That was with older technology. The Shackleton has redundant systems for everything critical. For the next 5 hours, we got the submersible ready. I checked and double-checked the life support, navigation, and communication systems, while Yuki focused on the rescue equipment and external mechanisms. Sarah coordinated with the Challenger's bridge, relaying updates on the Koan's status. Oxygen levels dropping faster than projected, she reported at one point. They're down to about 16 hours now. As launch time approached, Captain Evans came to the bay for a final briefing. "The plan is straightforward," he said, pointing to a topographical map of the seafloor. "You'll descend directly to these coordinates. Based on the Kotoku's data, the Koan is wedged in this narrow crevice. Your job is to attach the rescue cable, guide them out, and bring everyone back to the surface." "What about those pressure anomalies?" I asked. Evans looked at Sarah. "We've been watching them. They're all grouped about 3 kilometers from where you're headed. You should be fine, but keep your sensors on." "And if we do encounter anomalies?" Yuki asked. "Use your judgment. The priority is rescuing those scientists, but not at the expense of your safety." At 0650, we made our final preparations. Yuki and I climbed into the Shackleton, taking our spots in the pilot and co-pilot seats. The inside was cramped but practical, with screens all around us and a big window in front. "Last chance to back out," Yuki said as she initiated the pre-launch sequence. I shook my head. "I'm good." "Descent profile loaded," she continued, all business now. "Life support optimal, rescue equipment ready." From the external speaker, I heard the bay controller's voice. "Shackleton, you are cleared for launch. Opening bay doors now?" "Roger that," Yuki responded. "Beginning launch sequence." Water filled the launch bay as the exterior doors opened. I felt sweat beading on my forehead as the Shackleton detached from its moorings and began to float. "Launching in 3, 2, 1. Yuki activated the descent thrusters and we sank into the dark water. The Challenger's lights lit up our first part of going down, but they quickly got dim as we went deeper. The outside lights turned on by themselves, shining blue light into the dark water in front of us. "Passing 1,000 meters, Yuki announced, her voice calm and methodical. I focused on the monitoring systems, watching depth readings tick upward and pressure measurements climb steadily. The hull creaked occasionally, normal flexing as we descended. "So," Yuki said after several minutes of silence, "what brings a man afraid of the deep to the deepest place on Earth?" I continued watching my monitors. "Who says I'm afraid?" "Your file mentions deep water anxiety issues. Plus, you look like you're about to pass out." I exhaled slowly. "I had an incident during graduate work. Research dive off the coast of Chile. Equipment failure at 700 meters. "How long were you stuck?" 6 hours. Backup systems kept me alive, but..." I trailed off, remembering the absolute darkness after my lights failed, the growing cold as systems shut down one by one, the certainty that each breath might be my last. "You don't need to explain," Yuki said. "I get it." She told me about her first solo dive off the coast of Okinawa. She'd grown up there watching her dad's boat go out to sea each morning. "I was certified for 500 meters, but I went to 750 because I was young and stupid," she said with a small laugh. My oxygen recycler started making this high-pitched noise like a tea kettle, but much worse. I was sure it was about to explode. What happened? A loose filter cap. Fixed it in about 10 seconds once I calmed down enough to think. She adjusted our descent angle slightly. But those 10 seconds of pure panic, I still remember them perfectly. As we kept going down, Yuki told us more stories from her 12 years working in the deep sea. She talked about glowing sea creatures, hot vents on the ocean floor, and how it got really quiet the deeper we went. 5,000 meters, she announced. "Halfway there." I checked our communication link. "Challenger, this is Shackleton. Status report. All systems normal. Descended to 5,000 meters. Captain Evans's voice came back clear but with slight static. "Roger that, Shackleton. The Koan reports oxygen reserves at 14 hours remaining. Continue descent. The crushing reality of our depth pressed against my consciousness with each passing minute. At 5,000 meters, we had more water above us than Mount Everest had height. The pressure outside would flatten a human body instantly. 7,000 meters, Yuki said sometime later, entering the Hadal zone. I'd studied the deepest part of the ocean for years. It's a place so harsh that we know less about it than Mars, but life still exists down there in some really weird forms. See-through fish with huge jaws, bright red shrimp that can handle pressures that would flatten a submarine, bacteria that live in conditions nothing else could survive. Challenger, Shackleton reporting depth 8,500 meters, I said into the comm system. The response came back garbled. Challenger, please repeat. You're breaking up. Shack, on, Contin, descent, Koan, oxygen, 12 hours. Yuki adjusted the communication settings. We're getting into the interference zone. We'll lose clear contact soon. Great, I muttered. Don't worry. The locational beacon will still function. They'll know where we are even if we can't talk to them. At 9,000 meters, the communication turned to nothing but static. We kept going in silence, with only the sound of the Shackleton systems and the occasional creak of the hull. 10,000 meters, Yuki announced, approaching maximum recorded depth. The darkness outside was complete now, our lights only showing a few meters ahead. Bits of marine snow drifted past our window as we kept moving. There, Yuki pointed suddenly. Sonar's picking up the Koan. I checked the instruments. 10,900 meters in closing. We should have visual soon. Our external lights caught the first glimpse of metal at 10,910 meters, a flash of reflective surface stuck in the wall of a narrow trench. As we moved closer, the Koan came fully into view. A round research submersible jammed into a tight crack in the rock face, its hull clearly damaged along one side. Koan, this is the Shackleton, I transmitted on the emergency frequency. Do you copy? The video screen flickered to life, showing 4 haggard faces crowded together. An older Japanese man spoke, his voice strained but controlled. This is Dr. Hiroshi Tanaka of the Koan. Thank you for coming. His English was precise despite the obvious stress. Our situation is deteriorating quickly. We're here to get you out, I assured him. What's your status? Oxygen at critical levels. Life support failing. Hull integrity compromised in Section 3. He paused. And something is wrong with our instruments. What kind of wrong? Yuki asked, already maneuvering the Shackleton into position above the Koan. They show impossible readings. Pressure fluctuations that violate physics. Temperature drops to near absolute zero, then back to normal within seconds. I exchanged a glance with Yuki. When did these readings start? Approximately 1 hour ago, shortly after we detected... He trailed off, looking to his colleagues. Detected what? I prompted. Movement. Large-scale movement below us. Our sonar registered a mass of significant size, but with properties unlike anything we've encountered. I was really nervous as we approached in the Shackleton. We need to move quickly. We're positioning to attach the rescue cable now. Yuki turned on the external robot arms. I'll need to get within 2 meters of their upper hatch to secure the connection. She moved our vessel really carefully, bringing us right over the Koan's emergency attachment point. The robot arm stretched out and grabbed the connector on our rescue cable. Almost there, she murmured, her concentration absolute. That's when our sonar pinged with a new contact. What is that? I leaned forward, adjusting the settings. There's something below us. It's big. Yuki didn't look away from her work. How big? I stared at the readings, checking the system again to make sure it wasn't an error. Massive, and moving upward. The water around us got darker, like our external lights were fading. I checked the power readings. Normal. This wasn't equipment failure. On the video screen, Dr. Tanaka's face suddenly changed. His eyes widened as he looked past his viewport toward something below. The other scientists began pointing frantically, looking like they were shouting though we couldn't hear them. "What are they seeing?" I asked, even as dread pooled in my stomach. "Thomas." Yuki's voice had lost its calm edge. "Look." I turned toward our viewport, following where she was looking downward. At first I saw nothing but darkness. Then, as my eyes adjusted, I realized the darkness itself was moving, flowing, changing. A huge shape came out of the deep water below us, something that bent the light around its edges. I couldn't make sense of what I was seeing. It looked solid and liquid at the same time, with corners that seemed to fold into themselves in ways that hurt my eyes. Bright spots pulsed across its surface in patterns that made no sense. As it rose toward us, I knew what I was seeing couldn't be real, not in the world as I knew it. The thing moved up and down beneath our boats, so big I couldn't wrap my head around it. It clearly didn't belong here, but there it was. As it came up toward us, I realized that what I was seeing couldn't be real. The thing moved under our boats, so huge I couldn't wrap my head around it. It didn't belong here, but it was definitely there. I held onto the controls of the Shackleton until my fingers hurt. The boat tipped as the thing pushed water all around us, making new currents out of nowhere. Warning lights lit up all over the console. "Stabilizing thrusters engaged," I said, my voice unrecognizable even to myself. The creature kept moving up. It moved weirdly smoothly for something so big, bending in ways that didn't make sense, like parts of it were somewhere I couldn't see. On our video link, Dr. Tanaka was right up against the koan's window. Everyone else backed away in a group, scared, but Tanaka just kept staring. His eyes got big as he watched the pulsing lights coming from the thing's surface. Those lights. I wanted to look away, but couldn't. They blinked in patterns that seemed to follow some kind of order I almost understood. Blue-green glowing spots arranged in shapes that seemed to change the more I looked. They weren't just lights, they were sending some kind of message. I blinked, and everything changed. When I opened my eyes, the Shackleton looked wrong. The control panel looked wobbly, with buttons and switches moving around. The metal walls seemed to move in and out. My navigation screen showed weird symbols I'd never seen before. I blinked again, and things mostly went back to normal. The controls were solid again, but not exactly like before. Something was different about them that I couldn't quite figure out. "Yuki," I managed to say, "do you see—" "Concentrating." She cut me off, her voice tight. Her hands worked the external manipulator controls with practiced precision, but I noticed her lips moving continuously. She was whispering something. I leaned closer, trying to make out her words without taking my eyes off the thing below us. "Non-Euclidean transitional phasing requires 7-dimensional counterbalance," she murmured, the words making no sense to me. "Asymptotic convergence at the boundary condition." These weren't phrases from any operation manual I knew. They sounded like advanced physics stuff, way over my head math-wise. "Almost there," she said louder, addressing me while still working the controls. The manipulator arms extended toward the koan's emergency attachment point, the rescue cable within inches of connection. A sudden movement drew my attention back to the video feed. Dr. Tanaka had placed both palms flat against the viewport, his face now inches from the glass. His colleagues appeared to be trying to pull him back, but he resisted them with unnatural strength. The entity below us pulsed, its light patterns accelerating. A tendril of its substance, neither liquid nor solid, but somehow both, rose directly between our two submersibles. "Hurry!" I urged Yuki, fighting to keep the Shackleton stable as new currents buffeted us. "Cable locked," she announced just as the tendril touched the koan's hull. Dr. Tanaka began to scream. The sound came through our audio feed, but it didn't stop there. It tore through the Shackleton's hull, shaking the metal and going right into my bones. It wasn't just loud. It was wrong, like it had notes no person should be able to hear. My teeth hurt, and I could taste metal in my mouth. On the video feed, dark lines spread across Tanaka's skin, starting at his fingertips where they touched the viewport. The lines split like veins, but they didn't follow any pattern I knew. They moved up his arms, hit his neck, and covered his face. The other team members backed away as Tanaka's face started to change. His features seemed to melt, like his skin had turned to liquid. His mouth stretched wider than any human mouth should. His eyes bulged, then multiplied. I wasn't seeing things. His body was changing in ways that shouldn't be possible. "Thomas!" Yuki's voice cut through my horror. "Help me initiate ascent!" I focused on the controls again. The rescue cable was attached, but we needed to get the koan out of the crack before we could start going up. I turned on the winch, pulling the cable tight while Yuki moved us into position. But the thing wasn't done yet. More of those snake-like arms rose up around us, wrapping around both subs. Where they touched the Shackleton's hull, frost patterns showed up on our window, ice crystals that kept growing and changing as I looked at them. One of those arms pressed against our outside camera, and our video feed from the koan turned into weird repeating patterns that kept splitting into smaller copies of the same image. "What is that thing?" I asked, knowing Yuki couldn't possibly have an answer. "Non-locally manifesting higher dimensional intersection," she replied without hesitation, as if reciting a definition. Her voice had changed, becoming flat and precise. "Our three-dimensional space-time can only perceive a projection of its true form." I stared at her, momentarily forgetting the horror outside. How could she know that? How could anyone know that? "Emergency ascent protocol engaged," she announced suddenly, her fingers flying over the controls. "Maximum thrust. Hold on." The Shackleton's engines roared to life, pulling against the thing's weight. The rescue cable got tight as we pulled the koan from where it was stuck. Warning alarms went off as we pushed past the recommended limits on several systems. I tried to keep track of how we were rising, but my vision started breaking apart. Every light broke into rainbow-like beams. The control panel seemed to split into layers, each showing different readouts. Yuki seemed to leave trails when she moved, like I was seeing multiple versions of her at once. "Thomas!" Her voice came from everywhere at once. "You need to maintain consciousness. Focus on something constant." I tried to respond, but my mouth wouldn't form words. The pressure in the cabin fluctuated wildly, not just air pressure, but something more fundamental. Gravity itself seemed to waver, crushing me into my seat one moment and nearly lifting me from it the next. Yuki grabbed my arm with a tight grip. Her nails dug into my flesh, breaking skin. The sharp pain momentarily cleared my foggy thoughts. "Count with me," she instructed, her voice now coming from just one location again. 1, 2, 3. I tried to follow her count, but the numbers got all weird in my head. It was like the glowing stuff from that thing had messed with my brain, making me think stuff I couldn't shake off. My arm hurt worse as Yuki squeezed harder. I looked down at the small cuts where her nails dug into my skin. The blood was acting strange, just hanging there in the air. I started to black out, with my vision going dark around the edges. The last thing I saw was Yuki's face looking weirdly calm while everything went crazy around us. Her eyes were all bloodshot, but she kept working through the ascent steps like a robot. Then everything just broke apart, and I remembered nothing more. Pain woke me up. Not the sharp, specific kind that comes from an injury, but an all-over body ache that made even breathing hard. I opened my eyes to a blurry ceiling, trying to figure out where I was. "He's waking up again," a woman's voice said somewhere to my left. I turned my head and felt pain shoot through my neck. I saw Dr. Emma Phillips fixing something on the IV stand next to my bed. The medical bay of the Challenger slowly came into view. White walls, monitoring equipment, and the soft sound of air moving through the room. "What happened?" My voice came out as a dry rasp. "Try not to move too much. Dr. Phillips said, inserting a needle into my IV line. "This will help with the pain." I watched as she injected a clear liquid into the port. Almost immediately, a cool feeling spread up my arm, and the pain started to fade. "The koan?" I asked. "The rescue?" "Successful, more or less," she replied, not meeting my eyes as she checked my vital signs on a monitor. "Captain Evans will brief you when you're more stable." As the medication kicked in, I noticed other feelings besides the pain. My muscles felt stiff, like I hadn't moved in a long time. The bandages on my arms and chest were itchy, and my mouth was dry from not having enough water. I spotted a wall calendar, the type where you cross off each day. 5 days had been marked since we went down in the Shackleton. 5 days that were completely blank in my memory. "I've been unconscious for 5 days?" I asked, trying to piece together what had happened after... After what? My memory of the rescue attempt fragmented when I tried to access it. Flashes of light, Yuki's voice counting, a feeling of reality slipping away. Dr. Phillips nodded. "You were in and out. This is the first time you've been lucid enough for a real conversation." She handed me a cup of water. Small sips. The water tasted metallic but helped my dry throat. As I drank, I noticed bandages all over me. I pulled back the thin blanket and saw white gauze wrapped around my torso and some smaller bandages on my arms. "What happened to me?" I asked. "You sustained multiple lacerations during the ascent," Dr. Phillips explained, taking the cup from me when I finished. "Nothing too deep, fortunately. No major blood vessels were compromised." "Lacerations? From what?" She adjusted something on my monitor before answering. "Trauma during the rapid ascent. The submersible took significant damage. You were thrown against broken equipment, according to Yuki." Something felt off about her explanation, but I couldn't figure out why. My memories were all jumbled up, just random flashes with no connection. I could see the entity coming up from below, with its weird shape that didn't make sense, and the lights moving across it. I remember Dr. Tanaka screaming. After that, everything went blank. "Dr. Tanaka and the others?" I asked. "They're alive," Dr. Phillips said, her tone carefully neutral. She made a note in my chart and headed toward the door. "I need to inform the captain you're awake. Try to rest." Left alone, I tested my limbs carefully. Everything worked, but moving made my muscles hurt. I touched one of the bandages on my arm, feeling the cut underneath. The shape seemed planned, not like a random injury from getting thrown against equipment. I didn't have time to think about this more before the medical bay door opened again. Yuki Chen walked in, standing very straight with exact movements. Something about her had changed since I'd last seen her. She seemed more still than before. "Good to see you conscious," she said, stopping at the foot of my bed. Her voice held the same calm efficiency it had during our descent, but now it lacked any emotional undertone. "They tell me it's been 5 days," I said, studying her face. "No visible injuries, but the blood vessels in her eyes still showed the broken capillaries I remembered from our ascent, giving her sclera a reddish tint. 5 days, 7 hours, and approximately 22 minutes since we initiated emergency ascent protocols," she confirmed with unsettling precision. "What happened down there?" I asked. "After I lost consciousness?" Yuki looked around the room before turning back to me. "We finished the rescue operation even though we ran into some problems. We got the koan out and brought it up with the Shackleton." "Complications," I repeated. "You mean the thing we saw?" Something flickered across her expression, gone so quickly I couldn't identify it. "The deep ocean has a lot of weird stuff scientists haven't figured out yet. That wasn't a jellyfish or a new species of squid, Yuki. That was..." I struggled to find words that could describe what we'd encountered. "That was something impossible." "Impossibility is a limitation of perception, not of reality," she replied, her voice taking on that same flat quality I'd heard in the Shackleton when she'd spoken of non-Euclidean transitional phasing. Our three-dimensional sensory apparatus cannot properly interpret higher dimensional structures. I felt deeply unsettled as I stood in the medical bay. This wasn't the Yuki I'd descended with. The words coming out of her mouth belonged in an advanced theoretical physics seminar, not from a submersible pilot. "How did we get back to the surface?" I asked, trying a different approach. I initiated emergency ascent protocols and maintained optimal trajectory despite variable pressure conditions. Her gaze shifted slightly away from mine. The Shackleton's systems performed adequately until the final 1,000 meters, at which point multiple failures occurred simultaneously. And the Koan, Dr. Tanaka and his team? They were recovered. Their submersible sustained significant structural damage. Dr. Tanaka experienced an adverse physiological reaction to pressure anomalies. Her explanations gave me the facts, but left out the important stuff, like she was hiding something on purpose. Whenever she talked about going back up to the surface, she looked away from me, staring at the wall, the equipment, anywhere except my eyes. "You're not telling me everything," I said. Yuki's hands went to her left wrist, touching a pattern on her skin. I hadn't noticed her do this before. "I can't tell you everything while you're still recovering. Captain Evans will fill you in later." Before I could ask more, she turned stiffly and walked out of the room, moving weirdly. I lay back, trying to understand what just happened. This Yuki wasn't the same person who'd told me stories about her first dive off Okinawa. Something was different about her, like she wasn't quite herself anymore. I couldn't figure out what had changed, and not knowing scared me more than any answer would have. Hours went by. Dr. Phillips came back twice to check on me and change the IV bag, but she dodged all my questions with typical doctor talk. I slept on and off, having weird dreams full of strange lights and impossible shapes. I woke up to find Captain Evans standing by my bed, his face looking more worn out than I remembered. "Mitchell," he said with a nod. "Good to have you back with us." "Thank you, sir." I tried to sit up straighter, wincing as the movement pulled at my bandaged cuts. Evans pulled up a chair and sat beside the bed. Unlike Dr. Phillips and Yuki, he looked me directly in the eyes, but I didn't like what I saw. He seemed wary and careful in a way he hadn't been before. "I need your account of what happened during the rescue operation," he said, "as much as you can remember." I described our descent, finding the Koan, and the appearance of the entity from below. Evans listened without interrupting me, his face blank even as I tried my best to explain what we'd seen that made no sense. When I mentioned how Dr. Tanaka's face had changed, his features rearranging themselves, Evans's jaw tightened slightly. "And after that?" he prompted when I paused. "I don't remember anything else. Everything just fell apart. Yuki was counting, trying to keep me focused, but reality stopped making sense." I rubbed at my temple, feeling a headache building. The next thing I knew, I was waking up here. Evans nodded slowly. "That aligns with what we could salvage from your mission logs." Salvage. All data from the Shackleton's external cameras and sensors was corrupted upon return. Same with the Koan systems. We have fragments of audio, some partial environmental readings, but nothing conclusive. "That's convenient," I said, immediately regretting my tone when Evans's eyes narrowed. "You think this situation is convenient, Mitchell?" His voice remained level, but I caught the edge beneath it. "I have one submersible with catastrophic damage, 4 Japanese researchers in various states of medical distress, and half a dozen crew members exhibiting symptoms we can't explain." "I'm sorry, sir. I didn't mean—" He waved away my apology. "Dr. Tanaka is currently quarantined in a separate medical facility on board. His condition is, unique." "I'd like to see him," I said. "That's not possible at this time. Dr. Phillips has implemented strict isolation protocols." "What about the others from the Koan?" Evans stood, straightening his uniform. 2 were stable but unresponsive. The 4th took his own life 36 hours after rescue. I felt stunned by his words. He what? Hanged himself using bedsheets. Left no note, no explanation. Evans moved toward the door. We're on an emergency return course to Guam. ETA 3 days. Once there, proper authorities will take over this investigation. Investigation? Of what? Evans paused at the door. Whatever happened down there wasn't just an equipment malfunction or a new marine species, Mitchell. You know that better than most. He turned back to face me. Rest. Recover. We'll talk more when you're stronger. After he left, I sat in silence, trying to process everything. A member of the Koan's crew had killed himself. Dr. Tanaka was quarantined. Yuki had changed in ways I couldn't really explain. And through it all, I kept coming back to that thing we'd encountered, something so weird that just seeing it had messed with my head. In the medical bay, I suddenly realized my hand was moving against my left wrist, fingers tracing a pattern on my skin. I hadn't meant to do this, but my fingers moved like they had a mind of their own, following a specific sequence. I made myself stop, freaked out by this automatic movement. It was the same pattern Yuki had traced. That thought made me feel sick. That evening, Dr. Phillips came to check on me one last time before lights out. As she fixed the bandages on my torso, I spotted something I'd missed before, her fingers moving against her own wrist. The same exact pattern. "What are you doing?" I asked, keeping my voice casual. She glanced down at her hand as if surprised to find it moving. "Oh, just a nervous habit. Seems like a specific pattern." Her expression remained neutral, professional. I hadn't noticed. She finished changing my bandages and stepped back. "You're healing well. If you continue to improve, we can move you back to your quarters tomorrow." "Can I see the submersible logs?" I asked. "The ones that weren't corrupted?" "That would be up to Captain Evans." She disposed of the old bandages and washed her hands methodically. "Is there anything else you need before I go?" I shook my head, watching as she left. Once alone, I swung my legs over the side of the bed, testing my strength. The pain was better now, dulled by medication and time. I stood carefully, holding onto the bed rail until I was sure I wouldn't fall. The bathroom was only a few steps away, but the short walk left me winded. I leaned against the sink, catching my breath before looking up at the mirror. My reflection shocked me. Pale skin, dark circles under my eyes, 5 days worth of stubble. But what caught my eye were the edges of bandages visible at the neckline of my medical gown. I needed to see what was underneath. I slowly peeled back the tape on one of the bandages on my forearm. Beneath it was a cut about 3 inches long, not deep, but straight, like it was made with a scalpel instead of from hitting broken equipment. I removed another bandage to find a similar cut, but at an angle to the first. I kept going, taking off every bandage I could reach, showing a network of cuts across my arms and torso. Standing before the mirror, I could now see them all together. Not random injuries, but a pattern. Geometric, deliberate. The cuts formed angles and intersections that seemed to map something across my skin. This wasn't from an accident, I whispered to my reflection. The pattern was too precise, too intentional. I couldn't have done this to myself, even in some weird blackout. And yet, as I stared at the lines etched into my skin, something about them seemed weirdly recognizable, like I should know what they meant. I traced one line with my finger, following it across my chest to where it crossed another cut at a perfect angle. The pain had dulled enough that I could focus on the pattern itself. As I looked at the cuts, I noticed something strange. The lines seemed to move slightly under my skin. I blinked, thinking it was just the light or my meds. But when I looked again, it was still happening. The lines pulsed. Not a lot, but they expanded and contracted in time with my heartbeat. Thump, expand, thump, contract. It matched perfectly. which couldn't just be random. I put my fingers against my neck, feeling my pulse. With each beat, the lines on my skin reacted, moving just barely but definitely there. What had happened to me down there? What had the entity done? I couldn't stop wondering as I looked at the weird pattern cut into my skin, a pattern connected to my heartbeat, to Yuki's changed behavior, to Dr. Phillips's unconscious tracing. I remembered what happened to Dr. Tanaka, the dark lines spreading across his skin as he pressed his hands against the viewport, lines that branched like veins but didn't follow any normal body pattern. I looked back at my reflection, at the cuts that now pulsed with each beat of my heart. They were the same patterns. I checked my pulse by touching my neck. With each beat, the lines on my skin moved a tiny bit, but they definitely moved. The bathroom mirror showed the truth. The geometric cuts on my body weren't random. They made the same pattern I'd seen on Dr. Tanaka's skin before I blacked out. I put the bandages back on carefully so Dr. Phillips wouldn't know I took them off. Back in bed at the medical bay, I stayed awake for hours, thinking the same questions over and over without finding answers. By morning, I knew what I needed to do. I had to look into what happened, starting with whatever data we still had from our encounter. Dr. Phillips let me go that afternoon and told me to rest and take it easy. As soon as she left me at my room, I went straight to the research lab instead. The Challenger was quieter than normal. Fewer people in the hallways, and those I saw moved weirdly. No one looked me in the eye. The lab was empty when I got there, which was perfect for me. I logged into the main computer and opened the mission data archive. The system confirmed what Captain Evans told me. Most of the data from both the Shackleton and the Koan was corrupted. All that was left were bits and pieces. I started with the external sensor logs, looking at environmental readings. Temperature data came up first, and I moved closer to the screen, not sure if I was seeing it right. According to these bits, the water temperature around our subs had dropped when the entity appeared, going from about 2 degrees Nelly to 270.3 degrees in less than 10 seconds. That couldn't happen. Water freezes at 0 degrees C normally. Even considering the extreme depths and pressure changes, nothing explains a temperature that close to absolute zero, 273.15 degrees, in the ocean. At that temperature, molecules barely move. Water would be more than frozen. It would be in a quantum state nobody had ever seen in nature. I ran a check on the temperature sensors, but the system said they were working fine during the dive. The readings weren't mistakes, or at least the equipment thought it was recording real conditions. Next, I looked at the sub's outside camera footage. All that was left were bursts of static mixed with fractals, patterns that repeated at different sizes, very similar to what I'd seen when the entity touched our camera. I couldn't get a single usable frame. The audio logs were just as weird. Most had only white noise, but one piece caught the moment Dr. Tanaka started screaming. I paused before playing it, then turned down the volume and pressed the button. The sound that came out wasn't human. It started as Tanaka's voice, but changed into something else. A layered vibration that seemed to have frequencies beyond what we can normally hear. My teeth started hurting just like they did in the sub. The lab lights flickered, and the computer itself restarted without warning. When the system came back on, a warning message showed that 3 other computers nearby had also crashed. The scream had somehow affected the electronic systems even as a recording. I sat back and rubbed my eyes. None of this made sense with what we know about physics, biology, or technology. Looking for answers? Michael Harris stood in the doorway with the corridor lights behind him. I hadn't heard him come up. Something like that, I replied, watching as he entered the lab. His movements seemed normal, not displaying the mechanical precision I'd noticed in Yuki and Dr. Phillips. I'm trying to understand what happened down there. Michael nodded and took a seat at the terminal next to mine. Captain Evans asked me to analyze the remaining data. I've been at it for 3 days. He rolled up his sleeves as he turned to his computer. That's when I noticed the marks on his forearm, red lines scratched into his skin, making angles and crossing patterns. "What happened to your arm?" I asked, keeping my voice casual despite the alarm bells ringing in my head. Michael looked down as if just noticing the scratches. "Oh, I've been doing that to let the pressure out." "Pressure?" "Inside my head, since we brought them back up." He resumed typing, apparently unconcerned. "The mathematics keeps building up. It needs somewhere to go." I stared at him, not knowing what to say. Michael had always been the most strictly logical person on the Challenger. Hearing him talk about mathematics building up, like it was a real thing, was really weird. "What mathematics are you talking about?" I asked. Michael's typing paused. "You've seen it too, in your dreams at least." His fingers resumed their work without him looking at the keyboard. "The patterns, the ones that were in its light, they keep repeating, growing, each one more complex than the last." My arm began to itch where the cut lines traced across my skin. I resisted the urge to scratch at them. "Have you found anything in the data?" I asked, redirecting the conversation. "Any explanation for what we encountered?" "Explanations require a common framework of understanding," Michael said, his voice flat. "We lack the cognitive architecture to contextualize what we experienced, like asking a two-dimensional being to describe a cube." He turned his monitor toward me. The screen showed a complicated 3D model spinning slowly, a strange geometric shape made of layered shapes that folded into each other in ways that hurt my brain to look at. "What is that?" I asked. "A simplified representation. The actual structure exists in more dimensions than we can perceive, but this gives an approximation." He tapped a key, and the model zoomed out to reveal that the structure I'd been looking at was just one node in a vastly larger network. "I've been reconstructing it based on sensor fragments and mathematical extrapolation." "You built this from the corrupted data?" Michael smiled thinly. "No, I built it from memory." I stood up and backed away. "You couldn't possibly remember something this complex from a brief encounter." "Not with normal human memory capacity, no." His eyes remained fixed on the rotating model. "But things have changed, Thomas. My mind works differently now. Faster, clearer. I see connections I never could before." I needed to leave. Something was very wrong with Michael, just as it was with Yuki and Dr. Phillips. But before I left, I needed one piece of information. "Where are they keeping Dr. Tanaka?" "Medical isolation ward, C." Michael didn't look away from his screen. "Level 3 security clearance required for entry." I thanked him and left quickly, feeling him watching me as I walked out of the lab. The isolation ward was in a restricted section of the medical bay. Getting in would be hard without proper clearance, but I knew the Challenger's systems and rules well enough to find a way in. I spent the next few hours watching the medical staff's rotation schedule. During shift change, there was a short window when the junior technician, Lee, was alone at the desk. I'd worked with Lee on previous trips. He was careful but wanted to impress higher-ranking scientists. When the time came, I walked up to the desk confidently. "Lee, I need 5 minutes with Dr. Tanaka," I said without preamble. "Captain's orders." Lee made a face, checking his tablet. "I don't have any authorization for that, Dr. Mitchell. It just came through. Evans is concerned about potential contamination vectors." I held up my own tablet, which displayed a fabricated report I'd created. "We need to check for specific biomarkers that might explain the spread of symptoms among the crew." Lee hesitated, glancing between me and his security console. Dr. Phillips was very clear about isolation protocols. "This comes directly from the captain, Lee. 5 minutes, observed through the quarantine glass, no physical contact." I maintained eye contact, projecting confidence I didn't feel. "You can call Evans to confirm if you want, but he's in the middle of coordinating our emergency return to Guam." After another moment's hesitation, Lee nodded and swiped his access card. 5 minutes only, Dr. Mitchell. I'll have to note this in the log." "Of course," I agreed, moving past him toward the isolation chamber. A short hallway opened into a viewing spot with thick glass separating us from the patient room. On the other side, the room was plain white with just a bed and some medical equipment. Dr. Tanaka was sitting on the edge of the bed, not moving at all, with his back to us. I could see the strange patterns on his neck and arms from where I stood. Dark lines that really showed up against his light skin. They looked like the same weird marks I'd found on my own body, but his were bigger and way more obvious. "Dr. Tanaka," I called through the intercom. "It's Thomas Mitchell from the rescue mission." No response. He remained motionless, not even his breathing visible. "Dr. Tanaka, I need to ask you about what happened in the koan, about what you saw before we arrived." Still nothing. I was about to try again when he moved. He just sort of popped up to his feet. The way he moved looked weird. It was too smooth, like he didn't need to struggle to get up like normal people do. "Dr. Tanaka?" Slowly, he turned to face me. I stepped back, my back hitting the wall. Tanaka's face looked completely wrong. His left eye sat higher than his right, and his mouth stretched too far on one side. Even worse was how his face seemed to move, like his features were in multiple places at once, making a blur that I couldn't make sense of. The lines I'd seen on his neck now ran all over his face, making a pattern that pulled and twisted his skin in different directions. Where the lines crossed, his skin folded inward at angles that just shouldn't be possible on a person's face. "Can you understand me?" I asked, my voice barely audible even to myself. Tanaka's head tilted at an unnatural angle. His mouth opened, and I got ready for another scream that would mess with reality. Instead, he talked in a strange voice that sounded like multiple people speaking at once. "Understanding requires equivalence of perception. You remain bound to three-dimensional sensory processing." "What happened to you?" I asked. "Expansion." His misaligned eyes fixed on me. The entity remapped my neural architecture to accommodate higher dimensional information processing. Are you still human?" He made a sound that was almost like laughter, but it sounded off somehow. "Being human is just one small way of thinking. I still remember what it felt like, but I've gone beyond those limitations now." "The patterns," I said, pulling back my sleeve to reveal my own geometric cuts. "They're all over the crew. What do they mean?" Tanaka's distorted face pressed closer to the glass. "The patterns are pathways, access points. The thing exists in multiple dimensions but needs actual physical spots in our world to stay connected. Contact for what purpose? Purpose implies linear causality. The entity does not operate within such constraints." His mouth stretched wider. "But if translation is necessary, to teach, to transform, to elevate. One of your crew killed himself," I said. "That's not elevation." "Transition is not universal. Some cognitive architectures collapse under dimensionally expanded awareness." I was about to ask another question when the intercom clicked off. Through the door, I heard Lee's voice. "Dr. Mitchell, your 5 minutes are up." I looked back at Tanaka, who had gone back to his original spot on the bed, back turned, completely still, like our conversation never happened. Walking back to my quarters, I tried to make sense of what I'd learned. The entity wasn't just some deep-sea creature. It was something from beyond our normal reality. Being near it had changed people who encountered it, rewiring their biology and thinking patterns into shapes that worked as access points. Access points for what? Communication? Control? Transformation? I got to my cabin completely wiped out. After punching in my code, I opened the door and found someone already inside, Sarah Bennett, sitting stiffly on the edge of my bed. She barely moved as she turned to look at me. "Thomas," she said, her voice lacking the warmth it once held. "I've been waiting for you." "How did you get in here?" I asked, remaining in the doorway. "Access codes are patterns. All patterns are mathematically derivable if you understand the underlying structures." She stood with that same unnatural fluidity I'd seen in Tanaka. "I needed to speak with you," About what? About the dreams. Her hand moved to her arm, scratching at the fabric of her sleeve. About the mathematics beneath reality. I noticed blood seeping through the fabric where she scratched. Sarah, you're hurting yourself. She looked down at her arm like it didn't even matter. The pain is worth it. It helps me see things clearly. Sarah rolled up her sleeve, showing the same geometric pattern I recognized on her skin. But unlike my wounds, which looked like they happened all at once, hers were in different stages, some still bleeding, others with scabs or old scars from picking at them over and over. The dreams began 3 nights ago, she continued, seemingly unconcerned about the blood. Recursive sequences that reveal the mathematical underpinnings of physical reality. Each night the patterns grow more complex, more beautiful. Sarah, I said carefully. Something happened to us down there. To all of us who were exposed to the entity. These aren't just dreams. Something is changing in our minds, in our bodies. Yes. Her expression brightened with an approximation of her old enthusiasm, though it didn't reach her eyes. Exactly. We're being reconfigured to process higher dimensional information. Our brains are being rewired, neuron by neuron. That doesn't concern you? Concern requires uncertainty about outcomes. I have none. She took a step toward me. In my dream last night, I saw what we're becoming, Thomas. I saw beyond the veil of 3-dimensional space-time into a reality so vast, so intricate, that human language cannot contain it. As she spoke, she continued scratching her arm, digging deeper until fresh blood ran freely down her wrist. Her face showed no pain, only an intense focus. The entity, she went on, it's not a creature as we understand life. It's a nexus point where multiple dimensional planes intersect with our reality. Its appearance in the trench wasn't coincidence. It was mathematics. Probability curves converging at exact coordinates in space-time. I took a step toward her, reaching for her bleeding arm. Let me help you with that. Sarah pulled back really fast. No, the patterns must be maintained. They're calibrating, Thomas. Connecting our brains to the frequencies of the entity. Sarah, listen to yourself. This isn't you talking. This isn't the scientist I know. I am more myself than I have ever been. Her eyes fixed on mine with unsettling intensity. Science seeks understanding of reality. I understand more now than all of human science combined. The entity showed me equations that unify quantum mechanics and relativity. It revealed mathematical proofs that resolve paradoxes we've struggled with for centuries. As she spoke, I noticed her movements getting smoother and more exact, like she suddenly knew exactly what she was doing. You should embrace the change, Thomas, she said, her voice dropping to a whisper. It hurts at first, yes. The human mind wasn't designed to comprehend dimensional mathematics, but once you stop resisting, once you allow the patterns to complete themselves. Her expression shifted into something approaching reverence. It's beautiful, like seeing colors that have always existed but were beyond your perception. I've seen Dr. Tanaka, I countered. What's happening to him isn't beautiful. It's a transformation that's destroying his humanity. Sarah's head tilted at the same unnatural angle I'd seen from Tanaka. Destruction implies loss. This is addition, not subtraction. We aren't losing our humanity. We're transcending its limitations. She moved toward the door, taking very even steps. The change is already within you, Thomas. I can see the patterns beginning to align in your mind. Soon you'll understand. As she reached the doorway, she turned back. 3 days until we reach Guam. By then, enough of us will have completed the transition. We'll be ready to extend the pattern. Extend it how? I asked. But Sarah had already slipped out into the corridor, leaving only a few drops of blood on my floor as evidence she'd been there at all. I locked the door and fell onto my bed, my thoughts all over the place. The thing in the trench wasn't just alone down there. It was spreading through us, through the weird marks it had somehow put on our bodies and minds. It was changing us, getting us ready for something. The cuts on my skin started to itch again, and I noticed my fingers moving toward them, wanting to scratch and make the patterns deeper like Sarah had done. I pulled my hand back. 3 days until we got to Guam. 3 days to figure out what was happening to everyone on the Challenger, and to stop it before whatever this thing was could reach the mainland. 2 days after my conversation with Sarah, I sat in my quarters looking at a chart I'd made on my tablet. 7 names lined the left column, each with notes tracking how they were getting worse. 7 crew members who now had those strange geometric patterns on their skin, who traced invisible math on their wrists, who talked about dimensional constants and weird geometries. I'd been documenting everything, recording conversations, taking pictures of the spreading marks, noting behavior changes, the way they moved so precisely, how they all used the same phrases about higher dimensional information processing and mathematical underpinnings of reality. How none of them seemed worried about their own health anymore. My own cuts had started to heal, but they still itched all the time. Sometimes I caught myself scratching at them without thinking, making the patterns deeper. Each time I had to grab my own hand to stop. The tablet screen blurred as my eyes lost focus. I hadn't really slept in 2 days. How could I, when every time I closed my eyes the patterns showed up? Geometric shapes expanding and shrinking, folding through dimensions I couldn't quite see. The ship's announcement system made a crackling sound. "This is Captain Evans. We remain on emergency protocol. Estimated arrival at Guam in 3 days, 4 hours. All crew are required to report for medical evaluation according to the schedule posted in each section. That is all." His voice sounded strained, like he was trying to be in charge but was worn out. At least he still wasn't showing symptoms. Yesterday, when I told him what I'd found about the spreading condition, he put everyone in quarantine right away and had us speed up toward Guam even though it would burn more fuel. I grabbed my tablet and walked to the research lab. The hallways of the Challenger seemed different now, quieter, with crew members walking too stiffly instead of the normal, relaxed way they used to move. Those who had symptoms just gave me quick nods, moving like robots. The ones who didn't have symptoms yet, not many left now, stuck close to the walls and wouldn't look at anyone. In the lab, I set up the blood testing equipment and got a sample from my arm. Since finding the geometric patterns on my skin, I'd been testing my blood, trying to see if anything weird was happening to my cells. The microscope made a low noise as I put the fresh sample on the slide. Looking through the eyepiece, my blood cells seemed normal at first. Red cells floating in plasma with some white cells here and there. But when I zoomed in all the way, I saw the strange stuff again. Tiny crystal-like structures were floating between my blood cells, things I couldn't find in any medical book. They had geometric shapes, like tiny versions of the patterns on my skin, but the way they behaved freaked me out the most. When I looked right at one structure, it stayed in one spot and shape. But every time I blinked or looked away and back again, the structures were in different positions, different angles, different spots, like they only became fixed when someone was watching them. Quantum particles did this, existing as waves of possibility until someone looked at them. But quantum stuff wasn't supposed to be visible at our level, and definitely not in blood at room temperature. Unless something had changed the basic rules. I recorded how the structures behaved, tracking how they rearranged themselves during the split second when I blinked. Each new pattern seemed connected to the growing designs of the larger network. These changes weren't random. They followed math patterns I could almost figure out, but not quite. After 2 hours of looking, I sat back from the microscope and rubbed my eyes. I was starting to form a theory that went against normal physics, but matched everything we'd seen since we found that thing in the trench. What if that entity existed in more than 3 dimensions? What if, by touching it, we'd become doorways for forces from higher dimensions to enter our 3D world? I turned to my computer and started writing. Working theory. The entity encountered at 10,910 depth exists simultaneously in multiple dimensions beyond our perceivable reality. Contact with this entity has altered human biology at the quantum level, allowing higher dimensional structures to manifest within three-dimensional substrates, i.e., our bodies. The geometric patterns represent mathematical formulas that facilitate this dimensional bridging. The behavioral changes observed in affected crew members may indicate restructuring of neural pathways to accommodate processing of higher dimensional information that human brains were never evolved to handle. This would explain the obsession with mathematical patterns, the mechanical precision of movement, and the apparent loss of emotion or conventional human behavior. I stopped and thought for a moment. If I was right, this thing wasn't just changing people. It was using them to break into our world. Everyone who got affected became like a radio picking up broadcasts from somewhere else. And if this spread beyond the ship, I needed to call the mainland, tell someone what we might be bringing back with us. I ran to the comms room on the upper deck. The door was open, but inside everything was torn apart. The wall panels were off, with wires hanging out everywhere. The main radio was in pieces all over the floor. In the middle of the room was Yuki, her hands moving way too fast as she put the pieces together into something new, a weird branching structure that kept growing from the center. "Yuki," I said, stunned by the destruction of our communication equipment, "what have you done?" She turned to me real quick. The blood vessels in her eyes looked darker now, making the whites look almost black. "I'm establishing a proper transmission array," she replied, her voice eerily calm. "Standard radio technology is insufficient for higher dimensional signal propagation. You've destroyed our only link to the mainland. Three-dimensional communication has become obsolete." Her fingers continued their work, twisting wires and circuit components into impossible configurations. "It needs to hear us, all of us, across the dimensional boundary." "What needs to hear us?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. "The entity, the nexus point, the intersection." Her head tilted at that now familiar, unnatural angle. "It reached through to us. Now we must reach back." I took a step toward the door. "I need to tell the captain. Captain Evans no longer commands this vessel." Yuki's hands paused in their work. "Authority structures require common frameworks of understanding. Those frameworks no longer apply." I backed away from her, then turned and ran toward the bridge. I needed to find Captain Evans, to warn him that things had gotten worse than we'd expected. If Yuki had disabled communications, what else might the affected crew members be planning? The corridors felt longer as I ran, like the distances were bigger than I knew they actually were. It was my mind playing tricks on me, I told myself. Whatever was in my blood was messing with how I saw things. I reached the bridge and pushed through the door without waiting. "Captain, we have a situation." The captain's chair was empty. In fact, the entire bridge was deserted except for one person, Sarah Bennett, standing in front of the big window. She had her back to me and was standing weirdly stiff as she looked out at the ocean. "Sarah," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Where's Captain Evans?" She didn't respond immediately. When she did begin to turn, her movement looked off, jerky but smooth at the same time, like different parts of her body were turning separately from each other. "The captain is being prepared," she said, her voice layered with harmonics that hadn't been present before. "As are the others." Her face came into view, and I had to grab the nearest console to keep from falling backward. Her features had changed, looking just like what I'd seen happen to Dr. Tanaka. Her left eye sat higher than her right, and her mouth stretched too far on one side. But worse, her face seemed to be in multiple places at once, like I was seeing several slight movements all happening together. Where her normal face used to be was now a grid of lines, the geometric pattern in its final stage. At the points where these lines crossed, her skin folded inward, making impossible angles on what used to be a human face. "It's beautiful once you understand," Sarah said, her voice emanating from a mouth that opened wider than human anatomy should allow. "I didn't see it at first either, Thomas. The dimensional mathematics seemed impossible, incomprehensible, but then I stopped trying to force it into three-dimensional constraints." "Sarah," I said, taking a step back for each step she took forward, "this isn't you. Whatever that thing did to us in the trench, it's changing you, changing all of us." Change implies difference from an original state. Her head rotated slightly without her neck moving. "This is revelation, not alteration. The patterns were always there, in the quantum substrate of reality. We simply couldn't perceive them." She raised her hands toward me, and I watched in horror as they changed, her fingers breaking apart, bending weirdly, then coming back together in new ways as she moved. "You're nearly there yourself, Thomas," she said. "I can see the patterns aligning in your mind. Just let go of the constraints. Let the mathematics flow through you." Her fingers reached for my face, stretching way longer than should be possible as her skin kept breaking apart. Her body was changing in ways that made no sense. "Don't fight it," she whispered as her transformed hands drew closer. "No one can fight it. The entity exists in all possible dimensions simultaneously. It's already inside you, already rewriting what you are at the quantum level." I backed against the door, trying to grab the handle behind me. Sarah smiled way too wide. Her eyes looked different now, and I could see the weird glowing patterns from that thing in the trench reflected in them. "Join us," she said, her voice now a chorus of overlapping tones. "Understand the mathematics beneath reality." I slammed the bridge door shut just as Sarah's impossible fingers reached for my face. Her hand caught in the closing door, but instead of hearing the expected scream, her fingers simply detached, falling to the floor where they continued to move on their own across the metal. I ran. My boots pounded against the corridor floor as alarms suddenly blared throughout the Challenger. The sound cut through the weird quiet that had filled the ship over the past days, its wailing rise and fall matching my ragged breathing as I sprinted toward the research labs on the lower deck. The ship lurched beneath me. I stumbled against the wall, catching myself as the deck plates vibrated. The engine's steady noise that I usually ignored faded to silence. We were dead in the water. I passed the mess hall where two crew members sat perfectly still, their bodies angled in ways human spines shouldn't bend. They watched me with eyes that moved independently of each other but made no move to come after me. Not yet. The research lab was my only option. It contained equipment we might use to understand what was happening. And more importantly, it had reinforced doors designed to contain hazardous materials. I rounded the final corner and nearly collided with Ryan Wilson. His eyes were wide with panic, his communications uniform torn at the shoulder. "Mitchell!" He grabbed my arm. "What the hell is happening? I just saw Kowalski crawling on the ceiling. Literally on the ceiling." I pulled him along with me toward the lab. "No time to explain. We need to get somewhere secure." "The engines are down," Ryan said, keeping pace. "I tried calling the mainland, but comms are completely fried. Yuki did something to the equipment." We reached the lab doors. I punched in my access code with trembling fingers. The doors slid open to reveal two people already inside, Dr. Phillips and a junior engineer named Martinez. Phillips was bent over a microscope, while Martinez was frantically gathering equipment. "Lock it down," I told Ryan as we entered. "Everything. Security Protocol 7. Ryan moved to the main terminal and started the lockdown sequence while I turned to Phillips. Dark red lines showed at her collar and moved up her neck, the start of the pattern. Her eyes still looked clear and focused. "I've been studying my own blood samples," she said without preamble. "The crystalline structures are multiplying. They're changing the cellular composition at the quantum level." Martinez looked up from the storage cabinet where he was collecting tools. "I weld this door shut, yes? They're coming. I saw them in the corridor." I nodded, and he moved to the entrance with a portable welding kit. The lab had two doors, the main entrance and a smaller emergency exit. Both would need to be secured. "How long have you been here?" I asked Phillips. "About an hour." After Captain Evans started, she trailed off, her hand unconsciously moving to scratch at the pattern on her neck before she caught herself. "He's one of them now." Started ordering the unaffected crew into the cargo hold, said it was for necessary preparation. Martinez and I ran here instead. A thud against the outer door caught our attention. Through the small, reinforced window, I saw Michael Harris staring in at us. Or rather, what used to be Michael Harris. His body looked weird as it stretched out way too long one second, then squished down the next like his bones could bend in places they shouldn't. But his face kept that same calm look that all the changed crew had. "Ryan," I called, trying to keep my voice steady. "Where are we?" He looked up from the terminal. "Middle of the Philippine Sea. About 3 days from Guam if we had engines, which we don't." Martinez finished welding the main door and moved to the emergency exit. "This will hold for now, but not forever. What are these people? What's happened to the crew?" I took a breath, getting my thoughts together. "I think we ran into something in the Mariana Trench that exists in more dimensions than we can see. Something that's changing people, messing with them at their core." Phillips nodded. "The biological changes are nothing like anything in medical science. It's not just physical changes. Their brain patterns are being rewired. I took brain scans of Yuki yesterday before she refused any more tests. Her brain activity looked totally wrong." Another impact shook the main door. More faces appeared at the window. Sarah, Yuki, and others I knew, but whose features had started the same horrible changes. They moved against the glass in perfect unison, but in a messed up way, their arms and legs bending in ways they shouldn't. "They're not trying to kill us," I said, watching them. "They want to change us, to make us like them." "What's the plan?" Ryan asked, his voice tight with barely controlled panic. I turned to the lab equipment. "We study this, fast. If we can understand what's happening, maybe we can stop it." "I need more samples," Phillips said. "Blood, tissue, brain scans if possible." I rolled up my sleeve, exposing the geometric cuts. "Start with me. I'm infected, but still me, for now." Over the next hours, we worked like crazy as the banging on the doors kept coming again and again. Phillips took samples from both of us with the patterns, herself and me, while Martinez blocked the doors with whatever heavy stuff he could find. Ryan tried to get the lab's radio working, but said there was only static on all channels. Phillips and I bent over different desks, testing our samples. Looking through the microscope, I could see that the crystal-like stuff in my blood had grown since we last checked, making more complex patterns every hour. "Look at this," Phillips called, her voice strained. She had connected her neural scanner to a terminal displaying brain activity. "The patterns in our thoughts. They match the crystalline structures in our blood, which match the patterns we carve into our skin." I moved to her station, looking at the display. She was right. The neural activity in her brain showed the same geometric patterns we could see in the blood sample and on our skin. "It's like a virus," I muttered, a theory forming. "A higher dimensional virus that uses mathematical formulas as its genetic code." Phillips nodded, scratching at her neck before catching herself. "But viruses need a vector, a way to transmit themselves from host to host. How is this spreading?" I thought back to the trench, to the creature's moving body and glowing patterns. "Light," I said suddenly. The patterns of light it gave off. They weren't just for communication. They were encoding information. Information our brains absorbed and began copying. "But why the compulsion to scratch the patterns into our skin?" Phillips asked. The answer hit me all at once. Because the entity exists in higher dimensions than we can see. It needs anchors in our world to stay connected. The patterns we make work like math formulas. They connect the dimensions. Martinez looked up from the emergency exit. "So they're like Antennas? Receiving signals from elsewhere? Exactly. I turned to the equipment cabinets, which means if we can disrupt those signals, I began pulling out parts. A pulse generator for quantum experiments, signal amplifiers, field projectors. Martinez helped me put everything together into a makeshift device. "What are you building?" Ryan asked, abandoning his useless attempts at communication. "An electromagnetic pulse generator modified to create a specific disruption field," I explained, working quickly. "If the transformed crew are receiving signals through these mathematical anchors, we might be able to temporarily jam the transmission." Phillips joined us, her movements growing stiffer as the patterns spread further up her neck. The quantum resonance frequency would need to match the dimensional interference pattern. I nodded, finishing the connections. "I'm calibrating it to the exact inverse of the crystalline structure's vibration frequency." The pounding at the door suddenly stopped. We froze, looking toward the reinforced window. The faces had disappeared. "Where did they go?" Martinez whispered. His question got answered by a new noise, metal groaning from above. We looked up at the ceiling vent as the grate started to bend, caving inward like something heavy was pushing on it. "They're coming through the ventilation system," Ryan said, backing away. I connected the final wire to our makeshift device. "It's ready. I don't know what range it will have, but..." The ceiling grate tore free, clattering to the floor. Sarah's face appeared in the opening, her features still twisted in that impossible way. Her body followed, twisting into the room all wrong, joints bending backward and limbs stretching way too long. I activated the EM pulse generator. A high-pitched whine filled the lab as blue-white light pulsed outward in concentric rings. Sarah froze mid-descent, her body convulsing. The geometric patterns on her skin flared bright red, then faded to a dull brown. Her face flickered between the twisted version and her normal human features. When she spoke, her voice was her own again, the weird echo gone, replaced by the warm tones I remembered. "Thomas?" she gasped, her eyes suddenly clear and focused. "What's happening to me? Sarah? Are you... I stepped closer, keeping the pulse generator between us. Tears ran down her face as she looked human again for a moment. "It's still in me. I can feel it. But your field is interrupting its signal. Sarah, tell me what it is. What's happening to the crew?" Her body trembled with the effort of maintaining her human form. "It's not evil, Thomas. It's just incomprehensible. We're experiencing first contact with something that exists in dimensions we were never evolved to perceive." "But it's changing people," I argued, "destroying who they are." Sarah shook her head, wincing with pain. "Not destroying, translating. Our brains can't process higher-level stuff the way they are now. It's trying to change us, let us see what's really out there. By force, without consent. It doesn't understand consent, doesn't understand individuality as we do." Sarah's voice grew strained, her features beginning to shift back toward their transformed state. "It exists across all dimensions simultaneously. To it, we're just limited projections of higher dimensional beings. It thinks it's freeing us." The device in my hands began to overheat, the blue light flickering. "The field is failing," Phillips warned, her own voice sounding strange as the patterns on her neck pulsed. Sarah's body jerked, her limbs starting to stretch again. "Listen to me, Thomas. You can't stop this. None of us can. It's already inside all of you. The math, the patterns. They'll complete themselves eventually. There has to be a way," I insisted. "The ship," Sarah gasped, her voice beginning to layer with harmonics again. "The quantum stabilization system in the auxiliary research bay. It was designed to create stable conditions for quantum experiments. It might... temporarily." Her face twisted back into that creepy shape, and whatever clarity she had was gone. She jumped at me, moving smoothly and quickly again. Martinez hit Sarah in the head with a metal canister she barely noticed, turning to him like a robot. "The main door," Ryan shouted. I turned to see the welded entrance starting to warp, the metal glowing red hot as someone, or something, on the other side pushed with impossible force. The barricade wouldn't last much longer. "We need to get to the auxiliary bay," I shouted, grabbing the overheating pulse generator. "Now!" Phillips pointed to a maintenance hatch in the floor that led to service tunnels between decks. Martinez pried it open while Ryan grabbed emergency lights from a cabinet. Sarah and 2 other changed crew members were now fully in the lab, moving toward us with a weird, stiff way of walking. The main door broke with a screech of tearing metal, showing more changed crew pushing their way in. "Go!" I yelled, activating the pulse generator one last time. The device gave one last stronger pulse before dying completely. The changed crew stumbled, confused for a moment. We took advantage and dropped through the hatch one by one, Martinez pulling it shut above us just as hands grabbed for the opening. The service tunnel was tight and dark, with only Ryan's emergency lights showing the way. We moved fast through the small space, hearing noises in the tunnels around us. "They're in the tunnel system too," Martinez whispered, his voice echoing slightly in the confined space. "The auxiliary bay is 2 sections over," I said, leading the way. The quantum stabilization system was an experimental addition, designed to create a field where quantum states remain fixed and observable. "If the entity operates on quantum principles across dimensions," Phillips said, her voice growing more mechanical despite her efforts, "a stabilization field might temporarily lock it and us into our traditional 3-dimensional states." We reached a vertical shaft and climbed down the ladder to a lower level. Ryan went first, then Martinez and Phillips. I went last, looking up to see faces staring down at us from the tunnel intersection, faces with too many eyes and mouths that opened in weird ways. The auxiliary research bay was empty when we got there, which was a relief. I quickly went to the main control panel and turned on systems that hadn't been used for months. The quantum stabilization array had been put in for special experiments, but nobody ever fully set it up across the ship. "Help me reroute power," I told Martinez, who immediately began connecting auxiliary power lines. Ryan locked the door while Phillips fixed the emitter. He was moving pretty stiffly now. "Will it work on the whole ship?" Ryan asked. "No," I replied, typing in command sequences. "The field has limited range, but if I can amplify it through the ship's power core, we might cover enough area to temporarily revert everyone." Banging started at the door. Through the small window, I saw Captain Evans's face, or what was left of it, pressed against the glass. His skin looked just like the others now, covered in those weird geometric patterns. "Hurry!" Ryan urged, bracing himself against the door. Martinez connected the final power coupling. "Ready!" I entered the activation sequence, and the system started up with a low buzz. Rings of blue-white light spread from the emitter array, like our makeshift pulse generator, but way stronger. The effect was immediate. Captain Evans jerked around at the window, his face switching between transformed and human forms. Throughout the ship, we heard screams. Not the reality-warping screams from the trench, but human cries of confusion and pain. Phillips collapsed to her knees beside me, her body shaking violently. The patterns on her neck faded from angry red to dull brown, becoming almost invisible. When she looked up, her eyes were clear again. "It's working," she whispered. The field spread out to its maximum range, covering most of the ship. Through the door window, I saw the crew members who had changed now stumbling in the corridor, their bodies partly going back to normal human shapes. Some fell to the floor, passed out. Others leaned against walls, looking at their hands in confusion. I helped Phillips to her feet as the system leveled out, its noise becoming a steady background sound. "How long will it last?" Martinez asked. I checked the power readings. "A few days at most. The system wasn't designed to run continuously." Ryan finally stepped away from the door, loosening up a bit. "What happens when it fails?" I touched the patterns on my arm that were still there but not active while the field was on. "This is temporary," We've stopped the signal from the other dimension, but the changes are stuck in us now. They're part of us. Phillips nodded. We've bought time, nothing more. Time enough to reach Guam? Ryan asked hopefully. Maybe, if we can get the engines running again. I moved to the communications terminal in the corner. And we need to warn them. Prepare them for what's coming. Martinez was already examining the system diagnostics. The engines weren't damaged, just shut down. With the crew temporarily back to normal, we might be able to restart them. I looked around at the three of them, the only crew members not affected. Phillips and I were okay for now because of the quantum field, but we still had the entity's patterns inside us. This was just a temporary fix, not a cure. We should find the captain, I said. See if the stabilization has returned him to himself. We carefully opened the door. The corridor beyond was littered with crew members in various states of consciousness. Some sat against walls, staring at their hands in confusion. Others lay unconscious on the floor, their bodies returned to normal human proportions. Captain Evans was among them, sitting with his back against the wall opposite our door. His face was his own again. The geometric patterns faded to almost invisible lines across his skin. When he looked up at us, recognition flashed in his eyes. "Mitchell," he said, his voice rough but human. "What did you do?" "Activated the quantum stabilization system," I replied, kneeling beside him. "It's temporarily reversed the effects of whatever happened to the crew." "I remember everything," Evans said, horror creeping into his voice. I was aware the entire time, watching my body move, hearing my voice say things, but I couldn't stop it, like being a passenger in my own skin. Phillips came over, her medical background kicking in even after what she'd been through. Looks like it brought everyone back to how they were before they fully changed, but our cells are still not normal. Evans got up slowly as I helped him. "How long?" "The system can run for 3 days at current power levels," I answered. "Maybe 4 if we divert non-essential power." The captain nodded, looking up and down the hallway. "Then we have 3 days to reach Guam and figure out what to do next." I kept quiet. We all knew we might be screwed. The entity had changed us at a basic level, down to our quantum structure. The stabilization field just put the process on pause for a while. I helped Captain Evans toward the bridge while other crew members started getting back up around us. We had 3 days of normal life, 3 days to get ready for whatever came next, when our brains might start seeing things humans weren't meant to see, whether we liked it or not.